Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Sage Accounting topic webinar. My name is Joanne Barnard. I will be your panelist and host for today. And what we're going to be discussing is we're going to be discussing the difference between the workflows in Sage Accounting versus Sage Pastel Accounting. So this is our Sage Accounting, which is our online product. And then we have our Pastel product, which is opening on screen. So I was requested to do this by an attendee who wanted to know what is the difference because they came from Partner or Express and they are now using Sage Accounting, and they said the way that you work with the accounts is slightly different, and they are not incorrect. It is a little bit different, and today we're going to be discussing that. So what I'm currently logging into, for those of you who don't know, is the demo company in Pastel Accounting, which is our desktop product and one of our oldest products. And basically, if we look at Pastel Accounting, we can see that the top menu is already very different to that we use in our Sage Accounting, our online product. Our online product is all about what you're working with. Are you working with customers? Are you working with suppliers? Are you working with items? Whereas in Pastel, it's what are you doing? Are you editing? Are you processing? Are you viewing? Are you changing? Are you setting up? So if we come to edit, all you can do in this menu is edit your different accounts. So everything is put in the edit menu, your customers, your suppliers, your inventory. Whereas in Sage Accounting, the workflow is specifically everything put in what you're working with. So like I went through the last few weeks in Sage Accounting, this is the customer workflow. This is the supplier workflow. This is the item workflow. And then we put it together and said, this is an overview of certain typical accounting workflows and how they can work. I believe that Sage Accounting makes it a little bit easier because if we do come and we create a customer, we create our customer, and from here, we're already in the menu to start, for example, our transactions. All our transactions are here, and this is in essence a very simplified customer workflow, which many people use. Now, as I said, there are many different ways you can use accounting and you can build your workflow, but it depends on what you're working with. Are you working with customers? Are you working with suppliers? Are you working with inventory? Are you just working in the bank? That will then depend on how you're going to build your workflow. Today, we're going to specifically discuss the difference with our customer workflows. So here we can see that it literally starts at the top where it tells you quotes, sales orders, tax invoices. Then it gives you the opposites of those. So recurring invoices, if you are using recurring, your credit notes, if you need to take back the items or services, goods, there's a problem, you're crediting it. And then you move on to your receipts, the allocation of those receipts, and then you would do your write-offs and your adjustments if need be. So this is typically a workflow. Now, you may not necessarily use all of these different options, but how these flows fit together do differ between the two programs. Because yes, if I come and I process my customers in my Pastel Accounting, it opens a big screen. And in the screen, I've got my different document types, which means that I could, in essence, start a quotation, move from a quotation to a sales order, a pro forma invoice, from that pro forma invoice to the invoice, and then I could do my tax invoice. There are also recurring tax invoices here, but the way that these things work are a little bit different. So here we can see that our quotation within Pastel is very similar to how we would process our quotation in Sage Accounting. So there are similarities where we can take a look and we can see. Sorry guys, so I have a different screen that none of you can see, but that's where I can see you all in, and it covers half my screen. So if we look here, we've got our customer. Now, the first thing that we're going to notice, which is a very big difference, is Pastel uses codes. Sage Accounting does not. So if you are moving from Pastel to Sage Accounting, you're going to have to look at your descriptions. And for example, if you've got checkers 5 times, you're going to have to now be able to differentiate between the different checkers. Obviously, putting their locations is a good way to do that. But say you've got JF Barnard 3 times, but you had different codes, so you knew which Barnard you were referring to, you're now going to need to change that, because you might need to actually use the first name and the surname instead of just initials, because it does happen that people do have the same initials. I'm sure that there are probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of JF Barnards, which is what I am. And you would need to differentiate that to know that you're dealing with Joanne Barnard. That's who I'm dealing with. I'm not dealing with Johan, for example. So you would need to look at your descriptions when actually creating and moving your master files across to your Sage Accounting to make sure that those descriptions make sense. However, you still need to select a customer. Then here you select your period and your date. Whereas in our Sage Accounting, we've got our date and our expiry date. So it's not working in periods per se, because the date sets period. In Pastel Accounting, however, you can say period sets date, which means you can do out of period processing. Sage Accounting doesn't allow you to do that. If you change the date, it's going to put it in the correct period. Whereas with Pastel, I quite literally, in spite of it being wrong, can select the 24th of August. I think I might have changed this to period set date. So I want to show you where you do that. Sorry, guys, just in case some of you are like, wait, why did it do that? You can set your system to do that. You go into periods, you enter your password. You do need sole access mode. Sorry, it's not periods. Here's where you can check your periods. It's entry types. I am still a little under the weather, so please forgive me if I'm a little foggy. Luckily, I am getting better and I no longer sound like a deranged squeaky toy. But here you can see period sets date or date sets period. And this is where you would need to then come in and change it accordingly. And you can alter that as you need to. Now, technically, I'm pretty sure that my period was defaulting my date, which does mean that my system shouldn't have been doing what it was doing. Period defaults date. Sorry, guys, I just want to go to sales. Yeah, period defaults date. So what technically happened here was my period is grayed out, and when your period is actually grayed out, that actually means that the date is defaulting the period. So I'm assuming that the user that I've logged in as has an issue, and in this situation, we would clear defaults and settings, and worst case scenario, we'd create another user. Now, this is something specific to Pastel Accounting. Most of you, I'm pretty sure, are actually using Sage Accounting, so I'm not going to do that. But this is where, for example, I can set this period to whatever I want with the date, and it can be out of period. Now, my expiry date is also similar. This is where the expiry date for payment happens. However, the expiry date, when I'm using a quotation, is when this quotation expires. So if you are using a tax invoice, it will say payment date. So these are the dates that you're using here, very similar to your date and your expiry date here. You're going to set that up. So the way that we process is very similar again, it just the screens look different. Now, when we are processing, and we selected our things, here I'm going to use items, and you can select your items, enter them, and enter the prices accordingly. So I'm going to say 10 here, And this is a quotation. So obviously the customer needs to accept or decline this quotation. This is not an updatable document in Pastel, much like it's not really an updatable document in Sage Accounting, but you wouldn't notice that so much. But this is not going to write to your GL account. So it's also very similar. Here I'm selecting an item. This also has accounting software, so there we go. And I can also enter my 10, and it will tell me, here's my quotation, and I can, for example, save. And it's saved those details as a quotation. Now, this is where the two differ, because if, for example, I say next document, this has saved. Now, it might print. Normally, you tell the system to print if you want it to, and it will have printed. Now, I won't be told. I won't get the screen that actually tells me, hi, this is expired. The reason it's expired is because I set the expiry date to today. So if you see that, you might need to, for example, go in and just edit that accordingly and go, okay, that's not what I meant. This needs to expire, for example, at the end of the month. And then you will save again. Now you can also edit your quotations on Pastel, but you're not going to have, for example, the status showing you pending or what's happening with it. We do have various different reports, but you would need to manually come in and run those reports. So you would need to see outstanding quotes or back order, and you could then say summary. We're going to say quotes, and we're going to say to screen. Now, guys, I'm not really teaching you Pastel, so I'm doing this pretty quickly to show you. But this is where you can then come in and you can go, okay, what is the date? What is the expiry date? What is the customer? What is the total cost? But you see, it's not going to tell you here, oh, this is pending or not pending. It expects you to look at the expiry date and go, yes, this is expired, or no, it hasn't expired yet. And you can then drill down into it to have a look, see that quotation, and then get hold of the customer accordingly, kind of thing. So the reports look different, and you're not going to actually be able to see and go, hang on, this is still pending as a very quick once-off. I need to find out what's happening. Here you can see if it's printed. You also have an action button here where you can preview, print, email, edit, delete, update the statement, create the invoice, create the sales order, or copy the quote. So these are telling you what actions you can take. Whereas if you are using Pastel, you actually need to know what the next steps are. When the customer agrees to it, you then would go in and you would, again, process your customers, and you would either process a sales order or a tax invoice. So much like in accounting, or in Sage Accounting, you can also jump. You don't always have to go quotation, sales order, tax invoice. You can go quotation, tax invoice. But if they insist on paying on a pro forma invoice, a lot of people will rename their sales orders to pro forma invoice. It's the name. You can do it in both. This is where you can come in, and when you do this, it will immediately tell you there's an outstanding quote for this customer. Do you want to link it? And you can say yes or no. So in Pastel, we link documents, and we will, if you select a customer or a supplier, it will automatically tell you you need to link. You can then go yes, and it will display the quotations that are available. This is also where you can select the quantities to use. Maybe all 10 didn't arrive and you only are selecting 5, and you can then say link. You will then be asked, what do you want to do with this quotation? Do you want to leave it in place? Do you want to delete the used lines, which means you've only used 5? What we can do is remove 5 from this quotation. When the remaining 5 come in, you can relink to those 5 and then remove the documents. The reason that we advise that you do remove documents is you don't want to be sitting with a whole lot of quotations that technically have expired, but it's up to you. You can leave the originals in place for history reasons, you can delete the lines, or you can remove the whole document. If you don't use all the lines though, and you remove the whole document, you're going to need to remember that those 5 need to go to this customer. Instead of the customer phoning you and going, hey, I still haven't received 5 items of my order. So often we'll just delete the used lines, and that will alter both the quotation and create our sales order or invoice. Now I'm doing sales order accordingly. Likewise, here we can tell it what actions to take. So we can go, I want to create my invoice or create my sales order. When you do that, everything is filled in for you. It's already linked. It already knows I need to link this. This is what's happening. It needs to be linked. Everything's going to be filled in. But if I change that to 5, to my knowledge, it does not do anything to the actual quote. The quote stays in place and it leaves the original quantity on. Now, that is something that I have been asked to add as a, and I think it has been added as a suggestion to allow similar functionality, because that was difficult for some people because they were used to it working this way. And when you come into your Sage Accounting, you can change it and you can save it. But if we look at our, sorry, I'm going to go back to my quotations, it's still saying pending and it's still got everything in place. And if I once again had to go to create sales order, it's still going to create the original sales order. So it hasn't altered it to go, hang on, you only did 5. It's not going to do that at all. You will need to remember that, okay, actually, I've already done 5 and I need to do the remainder. So that was something that wasn't carried across. And that was something that people struggled with. So Pastel has that where you can literally tell it what to do with the quote. Whereas here, this quote kind of remains and you need to choose what you do with it. It's like, even though I did go and I created the sales order, it didn't actually change the status. You have to manually come in and change that status. By creating a sales order, you would assume that this says accepted now. You would need to change to accepted, declined, or invoiced. So you would then need to say this is accepted, and you would need to manually come in if you've only had 5, and you would need to alter this accordingly so that the next time when you link it, it links accordingly. So that was a difference in those functions. It's like, for example, I can do a sales order and I can add a sales order and I can put it to. Now, if I go to from quote, you'll see it doesn't say anything about, hey, there is a quote. Are you aware there's a quote? You can use a quote. I would need to come in and check my quotes as well and go, okay, there are quotes. Have I processed this quote, yes or no? Which is why the flow is actually quite important. And my advice is actually to work from what you're doing. Go into your quotes rather, look at what quotes you have. Sorry guys, still a little snotty. Look at the quotes you have, see if they're accepted, see if they're expired. If a quote is expired, you can then delete the quote. Like, you would need to look at this and go, okay, that quote's actually expired. You know, either let me get hold of the person once more and go, this quote is expired. Are you still interested? I'd need to send you another quote. Or, okay, it's expired. Were you interested? Yes, no, no, great, let me delete it. If the quote is fully invoiced, similarly, my advice would be either you need to work on the fact that, hey, I am creating the invoice now, and we can create the invoice. Now, as you see, this is creating the invoice from the quote. Do I want to create it from the quote, or do I actually want to create this invoice from the sales order? So that is also where you need to be very careful. You can create an invoice from a quote and it's going to use the quote, not the sales order name. So if we are creating it from the sales order, again, the date is important, so make sure that we are setting our dates correctly. But if we go actions, we need to, because this is overdue, are we creating the invoice? If we create the invoice, it should automatically change that to invoiced. There you go. The sales order will be changed to invoiced so that it does automatically. And then again, we've got 5. What happens if there are only 2? You know, what will happen to this sales order in Sage Accounting? Because again, Pastel works in a very similar way to if I've created the sales order and I go next. And I now go to my tax invoice. Again, I would have to pull a report to see I need to do the tax invoice with my outstanding back orders. However, the moment I need to process, it's going to tell me there are quotations and sales orders. The moment I say yes, I need to know, am I linking to a quote or am I linking to a sales order? If I'm linking to a sales order, it's going to bring up the sales order. And then again, what happens if I can only put 2 out? Sorry, guys. This again will ask me, okay, the customer's overdue, so cool. But again, it's going to ask me what to do, and I can delete the lines on the sales order so that when I do this again, the other 3 can be linked. Yes, it'll have a different invoice number, but it should, because right now I'm sending out 2, the client will pay for 2. The others are on back order. They've said, send what you've got. I'm sending the 2 I've got. And once the remaining 3 arrive, I will send you remaining 3. In our accounting though, it didn't ask me any of that. What it did is it created my invoice accordingly. So that's great. But if I had to go add a tax invoice again, and here we can see quote or sales order, so it will give me both, which is great. But at the, oh, sorry, it does actually tell me. I did not know that because it didn't do it for the sales order. So it will tell me that they're here. But the problem is it hasn't deleted any of my lines at all. So again, even if I do select my sales order and go, yes, I do want to, it's going to say it's already been invoiced. Are you sure you want to invoice again, which is fantastic. But the problem is I do need to invoice again, and I'm going to need to remember that this should have actually now been 3. So it doesn't have that delete lines function where you can keep up with what's happening, which was a function that people missed. And they were like, does it have this? Doesn't it have this? So the invoice does tell you if they're quotes and sales orders, which is great. And then you know, okay, actually there was stuff on back order. Was it a quote? Was it a sales order? Have my sales orders come in? What's happening? But if you do select to link them, it doesn't ask you what to do with the sales order. The moment I go save, it's not asking me, hey, with the sales order now, what do you want me to do with it? Do you want to remove it? Do you want to keep it? Do you want to alter the lines? And again, it's up to you. If you like having your sales orders there and this doesn't bother you, great. However, if you're someone who was using the system specifically to keep track of back orders, that can be complicated. So that is a efficiency that Pastel has that Sage Accounting doesn't. But what Sage Accounting has that Pastel doesn't is when you are actually in your quotes, when you're in your sales orders, when you're in your tax invoices, you can very quickly see what's happening without having to run multiple reports and go, did I invoice this? Didn't I invoice this? Was this accepted? Wasn't it accepted? Because we have statuses here, we can actually see this quotation was accepted or this quotation was denied, or it's expired. Did the person come back to me? What's happening with it? Do I need to follow up? And you don't lose sales because stuff fell through the cracks. You can see at a touch what's happening. You can also action very quickly from your different options. So that's a nice functionality where Pastel loses on. Then if we stick to our tax invoices, then we will see on our tax invoices that when we are printing our things, when we go next document, this is where we can print our supporting documents. So, your Sage Accounting is much the same. If we go into our Sage Accounting and we want to print, we can see that we can print our delivery notes, or we can email invoice and delivery notes. So we can print them and we can email them. So that is much the same. Our delivery, our supporting documents, which are our delivery notes, are here, and we can choose to print and email those accordingly. So that is much the same, and we can send them through accordingly. Now, normally you would print your delivery note and maybe email your invoice, but you can do both. Because your delivery note, you want them to sign, say, yes, we've gotten it. So if they don't phone you and go, listen, yeah, I didn't get anything, you can pull out your delivery note and go, but you signed. That's what your delivery note is. Every time we get a take a lot order, we're signing a delivery note. So that is much the same, that functionality exists. And then these things write to our general ledger. That's what it then does. It saves and it writes to the general ledger, and it affects our inventory and it affects our customer's account. From here, what is our next flow? Again, we can look and we can see, oh, these things are unpaid, these are overdue, this is partially paid, or this is paid. Now, that might not necessarily be because the customer hasn't paid, but if we are sticking with everything and we're making sure that our flows are working, when we get our bank account, we're making sure that we are allocating. So again, here we can create a receipt, create a credit note, or we can copy the invoice. You can also print the delivery note from here and view your history. So if we had to create this receipt, it's going to automatically fill in the receipt for you, and you need to put it to your bank account. Now, this would normally be if the customer sends you proof of payment, but then you need to also remember that the customer EFT'd me, they sent me proof of payments, I did their receipt. I need to be careful if I'm doing bank feeds or if I'm importing my bank statement that there's going to be duplication now, because that is going to be on my bank statement, but I am manually creating a receipt, and that will then go through to my bank account. So this is where you need to be careful in your Sage Accounting, in our online version, because we've now created this receipt, but at the same time, when you are doing your banking and we are transacting in our banking, if we do bank feeds or if we are importing that bank statement, that transaction is going to be there again. I have already said that I've created this transaction and it is going to pull it through again because the system doesn't know it's duplication. You will then need to look for that duplication and remove it accordingly. So you need to be careful when doing those things because your bank recon is going to be out of balance then, and you don't want to be sitting for hours going, oh, I wish that I just rather waited to import my bank statements and do it that way. So you need to choose which way is going to be easier. Is it going to be easier to follow the flow from customers now? Or is it going to be easier, especially if you're doing bank feeds and maybe you're running your bank feeds every day or every second day, every week, that I actually just wait for that to come in? I can tell the client, send them an email, go, great, thank you. I see your proof of payment. The goods are on their way, whatever it is. Or, you know, maybe you have the goods will arrive in 48 hours to make sure it reflects in your bank. And then you need to decide, am I actually going to let it rather come through my bank? Once those transactions are showing, am I then going to allocate them? Because you do allocate them from your bank as per the banking workflow. You would come in, you would allocate those receipts accordingly. So here you can see more or less, create rules, split transactions, add attachments, allocate. So you would allocate accordingly, and then you can move on. And that, when you allocate, is you both creating the receipt and allocating the receipt, because that's where you need to be aware if you are looking here. Is this paid? Is it unpaid? Is it overdue? Is it partially paid? And that's where the most important thing that you need to do is to make sure that your allocate receipts every single month have in fact been allocated accordingly, that you're not sitting with a vast amount in unallocated, where you would need to come and then manually allocate that amount of money. Because that can happen where you've got money sitting here and you've got your invoices sitting on the other side. So you need to make sure that you have in fact allocated everything and you're not sitting with unallocated options. So that is where, from this side, moving off of transacting, your reports come into play. And you would come in and you would, for example, see customer unallocated receipts. That's what you would run. You would go, you know what, to make sure all my receipts are allocated, instead of going customers allocate receipts, each and every customer to make sure they know unallocated values, it's easier to go customer unallocated receipt report, select your filters and go view report. From here, you can very quickly see these are my receipts. This is what's unallocated. Okay, I maybe need to go and do some allocation, and you can select the exact customers. Once you have done that, that is where you can then come in, for example, see your tax invoices and very quickly go, okay, you know what? Yeah, I need to maybe get hold of, you know, Alpha Cycling because they haven't paid for invoice 9 for 3 months and actually it's still outstanding, whatever it is. And you can then check because you know what's happened, or you can see the partial paid and you can get hold of them and go, listen here guys, the last time you made payment for invoice 7 was on the 8th of August and you still owe 2,300 Rand. When are you going to make payment? Because you know all your receipts have been allocated. But as I said, you need to decide when you're going to process your receipts, how you're going to handle that, because it does fit in with banking here. When we are talking about Pastel accounting, many things are quite manual. And again, yes, if you are using EFT, it is important that when we are talking about our cash book, we do have something called Bank Manager. It does have direct feeds, and it also does allow you to import your bank statements. You can come in and process that payment or that receipt on your cash book. However, you also need to go, am I using bank feeds? Am I importing my bank statements? If I am, is this going to cause duplication? Now, the nice thing with your Sage accounting is that if we are looking here, we can look, and it's in a way a little bit easier to find duplication because it does tend to try to flag. Sorry guys, I just want to go into banking. And it can in fact flag things and put things together, and you can see it says keep duplicates. So it'll warn you when things look like they're duplicated. It'll be like, hey, the stuff looks duplicated. Do you want to keep them? Do you want to get rid of them? What's happening? It's something that we've put in, whereas Pastel doesn't have that. If I had to, for example, process, sorry, that's Bank Manager for Pastel. If I had to, for example, process a receipt here for a customer, and I update it, my system is not going to care that there's a duplicate. I would literally have to then figure out why there's a duplicate, and I would need to process reversals. That's how that would work. So I've now matched to this invoice, but if this had to come through either my bank feeds or through my import of my bank statement, there's no warning, there's nothing. This is on, because I can update this. The moment I've updated it, whereas if I update here, it still keeps my transactions. This transaction has gone through, it's gone. It is on my customer statements, it's on my customer report, and I would need to actually know that I've processed that. If I import my bank statement or if I do bank feeds, it's not going to warn me in any way, shape, or form. The only way I would be able to see that is through a detailed ledger by customer, for example. And I would then need to be going through reports on reports on reports on reports to make sure that the information that I'm seeing, is this a duplicate, for example? Oh, I'm seeing this. Is this discount? Is it a duplicate, or what's happening? You know, here I've got these two identical tax invoices. Is this a duplicate? Is it a problem? Why do I have these exact same things? That's where you need to look and go, okay, this is a duplicate or this is an error. Normally, the reference is what is going to help you when you're processing receipts. You will see the exact same duplicate. Look, guys, I'm using this one because although it's discount, it's got the exact same receipt. And that can show you, hang on, this is transferred twice. However, in Pastel Accounting, you now need to process what we call reversals, whereas in Sage Accounting, you can just delete the line. You can literally go, didn't want that. It's not that simple in Pastel Accounting. So again, the efficiency here was built on, whereas the efficiency here is old efficiencies and can be a little bit more complicated, whereby the reversal is processing the exact same transaction, but with a negative value. So if I had to do that, I would again have to come to receipts. I would use the exact same period, the exact same date. I would use the same customer. This was 3. I would need to call this reversal was 3,000. Then I would need to go and put negative 3,000. Sometimes it lets me do that, sometimes it doesn't. Negative 3,000. And here you see it's going to open, but how do you match a negative 3,000? It's not 3,000, it's a negative 3,000. So we're going to leave it as unmatched, and you're going to have to update. It's all very manual. So that is a difference now in how we're processing these receipts and how we reverse the receipts. So that is very manual, and if you do that reversal wrong, the only way to actually fix that is through a backup or processing a reversal of a reversal of a reversal of a reversal. So guys, you can see here that that can become quite complicated if you don't know how to do those reversals. Whereas Sage Accounting is much easier. So that's quite a big difference there. It's a lot simpler if there are duplicates. One, the system will kind of warn you that there's duplication. I can see multiple things that look similar. Is this duplication? And do you want to keep it or do you want to get rid of it? And if you want to get rid of it, it's literally a negative. Are you sure you want to delete this? Yes. Done. There's no error on, hey, I processed this and did it reverse out correctly. Now, in my case, this did reverse out correctly. We can see that they're the exact same transaction. One is on the credit, one is on the debit. That makes it 0. Great. But what if this had been done wrong? What if it was the incorrect date or was the incorrect reference, or I had put in the exclusive instead of the inclusive value? There's no ways to reverse that except with a backup. So there's that. Matching, while it looks different, is very similar as well. You go match open item. Here's where you would select your customer. However, This is where you then need to select periods. Normally we say 4, and then you would select the period that you want to look at. Then we look at unallocated. If there's a value in unallocated, I want to just show you what that would look like. It would look like that. You would then need to, so the whole thing would look like this. You would see the unallocated, you would have to click the plus button. You would then have to select the transactions so that you have an arrow pointing left and right. You would then need to come and you would need to find one that tells you there's an amount owed. So you don't want to put it onto a 0 item. You want to put it onto an amount owed. It'll move the allocation and you can save. Can you auto match? Yes. But if you auto match, it's going to match from the oldest down, and that may be incorrect matching. You also need to check the period you're in. For example, if I'm in March 23, it's going to match this to March 23. Which could change my aging on my statements. So you may need to go and go, oh, actually this transaction was for August and I needed to match it in August. So it doesn't tell me that I've got this amount available up until March 23 when I matched it. So that's pretty important. And that's where, again, a complication can arise, because if we look at our allocate receipts, we select the from and the to date. So, hey, these are the invoices I want to see. I want to see invoices between or a specific invoice number, and show outstanding only. Now, I can choose to see everything, but this makes it a lot easier for me when I'm selecting my customers. If I say show the outstanding only, I'm going, I don't want to see all the invoices that have ever been processed. So these are all of my invoices. I'm saying I only want to see the ones that are unallocated if I'm doing this. I don't want to see absolutely everything, because some of these are already allocated. I don't need to see them. That can cause confusion. I only want to see what's unallocated. You don't have that option here. It's going to give you everything. You're going to have to check, okay, does this need to be, is it sitting at 0? Does it still have something that needs to be allocated to it? And you're going to have to select that accordingly. You also need to check what period you are processing the adjustments in. With your accounting, this happens in the correct period so that that aging is always correct. It's not, hey, when are you processing this in? It literally goes, this receipt is here, that's the date, that's fine. And it sorts it out. This literally looks at the period you are selecting, and it will process it. Even if this is for March 23, it will go and put that payment then in October 22. It'll process it according to that. So you need to be careful here. If you do say unpaid only, it can show you what's unpaid, but in general, it's going to show you everything accordingly, and that can make it quite complicated. So again, I prefer this matching. So those are some of the differences that occurs. Then here again, if you are doing a customer write-off, that would be a journal, and you need to know how to process journals. There is no way for you to go, okay, here, let me process a customer write-off, and I can add that write-off correctly for this specific customer. I can select that invoice and it will write it off for me. You need to know exactly what you are doing. You need to know that it is, for example, a customer journal, and you need to know the exact amounts, the tax, the inclusive, the exclusive, the reference to use. You need to know how to actually write those as well as your adjustments. Again, your customer adjustments would be customer journals, whereas here we have specified. This is a customer adjustment to make it easier for you, and you can then process that adjustment accordingly. You can look at it and go, you know what, this is what I want to do. I want to use the inclusive value. I need to increase, I need to decrease, and this is my description and my comments on the matter, and it will do it accordingly for you. So guys, that is some of the differences when we're talking about those flows, how Pastel works a little bit differently to your accounting. And yes, there are some efficiencies that Pastel has, not many. It's more to do with the lines when you are processing quotations and sales orders than it is with anything else. With everything else, your Sage Accounting has more efficiencies when processing to assist you and to help you. So those are the differences as those occur. Those are some deficiencies you might find in either program, and those are things that you need to be aware of when processing and to know when to do what. So for example, if you do come from Pastel, you might go, oh, I need to do a customer adjustment, and you might immediately go to process a journal. No, you don't need to process a journal. You can, in fact, just process a customer adjustment. That is the correct place for it. So it's also to know where to do what and how to use the system efficiently. Likewise, if you move over to Pastel for whatever reason, you might find that you miss some of these things and you're like, okay, hang on, where am I doing this? Where is my write-off? Where is my, unfortunately in this situation, or fortunately depending, you would need to have some more accounting experience and you would need to know that those are customer journals that you need to process. There is no specific customer write-off or customer adjustment. You need to know how to manually process those, and you need to know when processing those journals what your contra account is, because you're going to have your customer account, but what is the contra account that you are processing to? Are you processing to the sales account? Are you processing to your customer control account? Which account are you in fact processing the contra to? And those are just some of the differences in our journeys, in how we process and in what can occur. Then on top of that, we have the difference in our reports. So for example, here we can print our different documents, we can analyze our sales, we can view our detailed ledgers, we can view our outstanding quotations and back orders, which are sales orders by our different options. We can view our balances and our monthly periodic age analysis, tax age analysis, overdue report, our invoices, and our open item history. Whereas our reports here, we can see what our reports are. Again, we've also got our sales, which are our analyzed sales. But here it's by customer or sales rep. Here we've got our balances, days outstanding, which is our aging, our age analysis. We can view our statements or do a statement run. There's no statement run per se in Pastel. It's still viewing your statements, but then you choose when you email them or not. We can view our transactions. That would be our detailed ledger. We can view our quotations or our quotations by customer, our sales orders or our sales orders by customer. So these are back orders per se, our invoices, our unallocated receipts, and our communication report. So the reports, while similar, are called different things or might contain slightly different information. And you would need to compare those two and then see where is the difference, what am I looking for, and is that something that I can either build into the list, for example. And what I mean by that is, if we look at the list, we've got our settings here, and is this something that we can customize the grid to? For example, to see the balance, to see the category, to see our telephone number. So for example, guys, like if you are using user-defined fields in Pastel, very rigid. User-defined fields in Sage Accounting, you can come and rename them. For example, medical aid number, and you can select that and those will show on your list, and you can send that list to a CSV file as a report if you need to. So you also need to look at that. My list of customers is customizable. Is there something that I need to show or that I can use the list and send to a CSV file as a report that can make it easier for me. So bear that in mind. Okay, so guys, someone's asked, what is a contra account? So we're now going to get into accounting, and a contra account is the opposite account. So with Pastel, you've got your double entry rule. For every debit, you need an opposing and equal credit. That's what your trial balance does. It makes sure that your debits and your credits are the same. When you are processing, whether you are processing in Sage Accounting or in Pastel Accounting, we use the double entry rule because that's just accounting. And there's always a contra account. So for example, if we process a customer invoice, it is going to write to the customer control account, which is an account that holds the overall balance of all of your customers. This shows you how much money you are owed, which works in your profit and loss. And it also then breaks that up into individual customer accounts. So those are almost like sub-accounts of the master accounts. It also needs to write to your sales account. So it debits your customer account and it credits your sales account. Now, of course, there's VAT. So your customer account is inclusive of VAT. Your sales account is credited by the exclusive value, and the other portion of the credit goes to your VAT control account. Therefore, that transaction is now, the debit is equal to the credit. The inclusive value is sitting on your customer. The exclusive value or the credit is split between your sales account and your VAT control account. So when you are processing journals in Pastel, you can't just go, I want to adjust this customer and do a write-off. Okay, cool. You're writing off the customer, and what you're doing is you're crediting that customer's account by the write-off. What is your contra account? Invariably, there's normally a bad debt account, which is an expense account, which shows as a debit. And you would use that as your contra account because that debit needs to be written somewhere. You're crediting the customer account and you're moving the money they owe you, that debit, into bad debt, which the company is responsible for because it's still an expense to you. You sold those goods. This customer has short paid you by 20 bucks. Yeah, it's only 20 bucks, but it's still 20 bucks. They've still short paid you by 20 Rand. It's not worth the legal fees to go and get that 20 Rand out of them. So it's going to cost you more to get hold of a debt collection company to phone Joanne up and go, hey, you remember that you still owe Jennifer's art supplies 20 bucks. Can you please pay her? Because they're going to charge you 100 bucks for every call. You're only going to hand over the accounts that are, 1,000 Rand and more, for example, or 500 and more to make it worth it for you, because you're prepared to pay 100 bucks for every 500 Rand they can get for you. And you'll be like, cool, that's cool. I'm good with that. I'm cool to pay someone 100 bucks if they can get 500 for me. Also bearing in mind, are you then going to turn that into legal proceedings? So you need to look at the amount that's owed to you. Is it worth you paying the expenses to get that money? And that's where bad debt comes in. It's not worth it for me to actually follow up. Let me get Joanne from the office to phone up Dave and say, listen here, Dave, we see your account is 20 bucks in arrears and we know you're not using us, but could you make that payment? Dave might be like, guys, I'm so sorry. Yeah, what I'm going to do is I know I'm down the road. When I go on lunch, I'm going to come and drop off the 20 bucks. Cool. It's only 20 bucks. But you get hold of Dave and Dave is like, yeah, no, I'll get to it. Sorry about that. Makes excuses. But Dave is like, yeah, guys, it's 20 bucks. Seriously? A month down the line, Dave still hasn't paid. You write it off. It's an expense to your business, though, because that is a loss. So it needs to be written, and that would normally go to a bad debts general ledger account that you write, which is considered your contra account. It's the account that balances the original transaction. I'm writing 20 Rand off of Joanne, so that is crediting her account, I need to show where that debit goes, and that debit normally goes against a contra account, which would be a bad debt account. I'm using bad debts as an example, guys, because one, I know which accounts it affects, and two, it's a good example. But anytime you are processing journals, you're going to need a main account and a contra account, an opposite account. If you're debiting the main account, which is always inclusive, you need to know what is the contra account. Am I using VAT? If I'm using VAT, the VAT control account is affected by the opposing side, so by a credit. And then where does the exclusive value go? That's what a contra account is. It is the opposing side of the transaction. I'm debiting this, what am I crediting? Or I'm crediting this, what am I debiting? I hope that makes sense. But in Pastel, it's very account driven. You need to understand bookkeeping, you do need to understand accounting, and you need to know what you're doing. If you do not know what the contra account is, you need to get hold of your accountants or your auditors, and they need to tell you, irrespective of which program you are using, getting hold of Sage. Guys, we support the software. So if there's a problem with the software, if the software is not doing what it should, if you told it to, for example, you processed a journal and you used Alpha Cycling Supplies as the account and it put this as the exclusive value, that's a system error. It's meant to be an inclusive value because the main account is always inclusive. The contra is always exclusive if you use VAT. That's where you get hold of us so we can look into it and go, what's happening? But if you need accounting advice, hey, I'm trying to do this transaction, I don't know what my contra account should be. We cannot tell you that because we are not accountants. We might be able to go look, it might be this or it might be that, but we're always going to follow up with please phone your accountants or auditors, because at the end of the day, guys, if you supply incorrect information to SARS, they're not going to come to us and go, but you told them. You're going to be upset with us, and it's not our intention, but you need to make sure that that information is correct. So if you're not sure what the opposite account should be, that's where you need to go to your financial manager, or your accountants, or your auditors and go, guys, I'm trying to process this. This is what I want to do. How would you advise I do this? And what are the accounts that I'm affecting? Am I crediting? Am I debiting? What is the opposite? Am I using VAT? And they will be able to assist you. But hopefully that helps. The main difference between Sage Accounting and Pastel Accounting is quite a big difference in the amount of accounting knowledge you do need to know. And you need to know what all those different accounts are, how they're affected, why they're affected, and if they're affected negatively, what the possible outcomes are. Sage Accounting is a little bit more user-friendly for someone who's a novice, who's not 100% sure and who's getting into accounting. You should have some bookkeeping understanding and know how some stuff works, but you can learn on the go, and it is set up to make it as easy as possible. We haven't allowed out of period processing because that makes things very difficult on reporting, that type of thing. I hope that helps, but the main reason for this was to show you the difference in the two products. If you're not using the two, it shouldn't be a big deal, but we do have a lot of people coming over from Pastel Accounting to Sage Accounting, and sometimes they're either not sure where to do the things they used to do on Pastel, or the efficiency they had, like with the lines, and you going, just remove the lines so I have a record, that is missing, and you do need to be aware of it so you can make notes of it. Guys, that's it for this webinar then. If anyone has any further questions, please send them through by using the question icon. It's a little question mark in a speech bubble, and I'll be happy to answer them. If you don't have any other questions, you're welcome to log out. I do hope that you found this useful and informative. And if you have any suggestions with regards on further topics, I am looking at what I'm going to be doing in November. Please remember to email me, joanne.barnard@sage.com, and let me know what you're struggling with or what you would like to know more about, I'm happy to create that as a topic so you get the most out of your product. And the recording should be sent tomorrow around this time. You should get an email whether you signed up and attended or not, and the recording should be attached to both. If you do not get that email or you do not get the recording, again, please email me and I will email the recording out to you. Otherwise, I hope that you have an amazing day further, a wonderful week, and I will see you at the next one. Thank you so much, guys.